Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 29th of June 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Good to see you in the studio, Mike. And behind the technical desk, we've got Nick Green. Well, what's the weather today? It's pretty hot and sunny, blue skies in Plymouth, and we're getting some mixed reports across the country. So some of you have got a bit of sunshine, some of you have got a bit of sun and cloud, and I'm afraid I haven't got a report from north of the border. So what's a good place to start with the news in Britain in 2015? It must be war.
Yes. So last Thursday and Friday was the two-day NATO defence ministers meeting in Brussels. That finished on Friday. And of course, as you would expect, they continued to bang the war drums against Russia. So it continues. A statement issued on Thursday. They declared their unity against Russia's intimidation of its neighbours, including Ukraine. And the Commander General Philip Breedlove, who's the NATO commander, said yesterday, this would have been on Friday, that Russia isn't finished with Ukraine yet, he claims. And that what smart people are saying is that Putin is determined to prevent the Ukraine from leaning towards the West, as he put it. So here we go on. It keeps going. Putin, on the other hand, said Russia is a country open to the world, which speaks out in favour of boosting cooperation and partnership with all those that are ready for that. We do not have and cannot have any aggressive plans. So what do you make of that, Brian?
Well, I think at the moment that we've got the David Cameron regime and the Obama regime lying. NATO's clearly being used, in my opinion, to cause aggression in Eastern Europe. And it's a pack of lies, really.
Yes. Well, we know that, of course, Western forces, mainly through the likes of George Soros' Open Society Foundation, have been sponsoring coloured revolutions all around the Russian borders over the last 20 years. And here's a new one, Armenia this time. And this is the Stephen Lendeman blog. And Stephen Lendeman is pointing out that that these protests, which have started in Armenia, have all the hallmarks of another attempted US orchestrated colour revolution. And he pointed out that on June the 26th, some leaders such as Pashinyan, if I've pronounced that correctly, I do apologise if I haven't, have a long history of violent activity. That he spent 2 years in prison, accused of attempting to seize state power by force, according to Lendeman, and so on. So just another attempt to institute regime change, which right on Russia's borders, Russia can't necessarily stand by and allow that to happen, and you can't really expect them to if there's Western interference in internal politics of a country which is bordering on Russia.
Couldn't say any more than that,
Yeah.
Except the situation increasingly being made dangerous. How dangerous can it get? Well, of course, if we have a British Prime Minister who is prepared to lie to the country, then things can get very dangerous indeed. So let's just go back and remind ourselves for that historic vote when Parliament, largely due to public pressure, decided that there should be no attack on Syria. This was the headline from The Guardian: blow to Cameron's authority as MPs rule out British assault on Syria. And the article said that David Cameron had definitively ruled out British involvement in any military action against Syria after the government lost a crucial vote in the House of Commons. So that was the big headline. What's happened since then? Well, I can just highlight that bit because this is the key bit. Ruled out British involvement. Just have a look at the International Business Times here. What are they talking about? ISIS news: British soldiers in Jordan and Turkey training rebels to fight the Islamic State and Bashar al-Assad. So it doesn't matter what the vote is in Westminster. David Cameron and his Conservative cohorts will simply carry out what overseas wars they think they require, obviously to assist their banker friends. But this is the key point. What we the British public, are being told, Mike, and what is happening in the background, two completely different things.
Well, it's interesting that the Russian authorities today have once again reiterated their support for Assad. So again, this looks like another potential proxy war between the West and Russia, actually.
Being ramped up.
Yeah.
Well, let's follow this through. We're not at the moment going to comment in any detail on events in Tunisia. Things are still unfolding. But let's come back to David Cameron and what David Cameron is saying as a result of the recent killings in Tunisia. Well, he's the man himself, and essentially, after all of the overseas wars, and we're now seeing a kickback, obviously, for what's taken place in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Cameron is using Tunisia as an excuse to clamp down within UK. So he's said on BBC Radio 4, we're a target. Frankly, we cannot hide from this thinking. If you step back, you become less of a target. They are attacking our way of life and what we stand for. And so we have to stand united with those that share our values. Well, let's remember what David Cameron's values are, because it's war and more war. But now we can see what he is really keen to do. Government sources also said ministers would press ahead with Conservative manifesto plans for restrictions on extremist views on social media, as well as banning extremists but not violent organisations such as Ut Tahrir. So no timescale's been given to this, but we're coming now to the heart of the matter, that whatever created those events in Tunisia, what does David Cameron want to use it for? He wants to use it for an increase in, or a speeding up in the clampdown on free speech in Britain. And of course, nothing would please the European Union more than to see the British public subsumed into what is increasingly a dictatorial style of government. So I think Greece is the only subject we can go to here.
Well, the BBC really disappointed because the Juncker, the EU chief, feels betrayed by Greece, apparently, which is a crying shame, I think. So anyway, the Greek Prime Minister, why is he feeling betrayed? Well, because Tsipras decided at the end of last week, on Friday, that the best course of action would be to hold a referendum on the latest EU proposals to kill the Greek people. This is mainly being driven by the threat of a pro-EU interim government sitting in the wings in Greece. And he felt that a clear statement from the Greek people was what was necessary. So he did, however, ask for the European Union, to give a 1 week grace period on the so-called emergency liquidity, because the earliest date that he could organise a referendum for was this coming Sunday, the 5th of July. But the EU said no. So, as you would imagine, around €1 billion was taken out of bank accounts on Saturday, according to RT here, and this is a total of €8 billion taken out in the last 2 weeks from the banks. So as a result, they have had to call a bank holiday, and banks are now going to be closed, apparently, for this whole week up until the referendum. But we have some good news on Greece, because this afternoon George Osborne is going to give a statement to Parliament.
Well, is the problem over?
I would have said so. And on top of that, David Cameron is to meet government officials today to put the final touches on the British contingency plans for a Grexit. So he said he's going to cover advice to tourists on the amount of cash they should take on holiday to Greece, and also to British pensioners who have retired to the country. Well, I suppose that's important enough, but really the British reaction to this, a nonsense. So what's likely to be next? Well, how about this? The Greeks will default, as I suggested on Friday, and this will cause a financial crisis on the scale of 2007-2008, and that will be used, thanks Adrian for this, by the way, that will be used as an excuse for this. So this is an article from 2010, when Ambrose Evans Pritchard pointing out that Brussels were planning a treasury for the EU, so more federalist integration of Europe. And this, of course, also pointed out just earlier this month in The Guardian, and also in EU observers. So this is clearly on the agenda. Now, if we put this in a little bit of context, because of course David Cameron has been running around European leaders begging for renegotiation of Britain's relationship with Europe. And what's the price for that? The European community, the European Union is openly saying that the price for a British renegotiation of its relationship with Europe is for an EU army. So what we're looking at here is a massive drive, the manipulation of geopolitics and financial situation for a massive drive for further European federalist integration, not only in terms of European army and foreign office and so on, but also a treasury, a financial institution for the European Union, effectively turning it into a nation state.
And this totally explains why the Conservatives have been massively cutting Britain's armed forces. We've been allowing the French into the command and control infrastructure so that we don't have a national military anymore. So you cut it right back, and then if there's any activity overseas, you've got to say, well, we've got to do it as a joint EU venture. And you've got the wedge in the door to create the European army. No wonder Putin is sitting there and saying there's something very dangerous afoot.
On the other side of the coin, because obviously the Greek situation is pretty dangerous for the Western financial system, on the other side of the coin is BRICS, of course. And South Africa has just announced that they have ratified both the agreement on the new development bank and also the contingent reserve arrangement, which these are part of the institutions of the BRICS agreement, and they're expecting to have this all up and running by the end of 2015. So Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, India, just getting on with it and not really caring too much about the Western financial system, which continues to demonstrate its utter corruption. So here we've got another bank, this time Rothschild's bank itself, fined over tax dodging, sort of HSBC type operations.
But it's only dodging. It's not fraud and corruption, Mike. So
they haven't done anything illegal, of course. It's just tax dodging.
Just a little bit of dodging.
They got a bit of a fine, a bit of a slap over the wrist. Like, a few million euros isn't going to cause Rothschild too much hassle, is it?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Put the man in prison. That might be a better option.
We'll press for that. How does the system work? Well, of course, we need the massive corruption of international banks, and then the theme which has been running through politics now coming to the surface is the abuse of children. This is a topic which UK Column is not going to let rest, because if you understand the abuse of children and the blackmail, you start to understand the whole of the control structure running through the British political establishment itself. So let's have a look at this story from the Mail. Surprise, surprise, really, because police files on sex abuse at Gordonstoun, where Prince Philip and Prince Charles were educated, oh dear, they've all disappeared. So one of the key schools that has educated the great and good in our establishment, police have now seem to have lost some of the files. Why would that be? One wonders. Well, let's follow it through, because of course the big headline at the moment is to do with Lord Janner. We understood just before we came live today that it's now been agreed that the procedure against Lord Janner will go ahead. Of course, that's not a proper trial, that's simply fact finding, and if the facts prove he did something, well,
he's too old to go to prison. Basically.
Too ill to go to prison.
Yeah.
But Xaro now getting into the heart of the beast, reporting some files have gone missing there as well. Strange coincidence.
No, much more than that. Basically, they didn't go missing because the police raided the home of a former officer. This was in 1991, in an attempt to collect personal letters between Janner and a boy who Janner is alleged to have sexually abused. So they actually raided the home of one of their own police officers in order to recover those letters. And it seems that any issue of cover-up clearly goes back 20 or 30 years, therefore. And, we perhaps are seeing similar sort of things going on today, where police seem to be attempting to actually identify where information is rather than actually identifying who has done what. They want to know who has the evidence.
Robert Greene, classic example. So the police, Scottish police, Cheshire police, raid the home of Robert Greene to make sure that evidence he held as to the statements originally made by abuse victim Holly Greig, all of that evidence disappeared out of his home into presumably police safe somewhere, never seen again. So if it gets too hot, if the establishment's under pressure from the child abuse accusations, then get the police in to steal the evidence.
If we just bring that one up for a second again, Nick, Ian Henning was the name of the former police officer, and he says that we, the police, have known about Jana and young boys for ages. So that is a pretty damning statement. And the police really have some questions to answer, I would have thought.
I think the police have got quite a lot of questions, especially Nottingham police at the moment, because we understand that the harassment of abuse victim Melanie Shaw still continues, but we'll come on to a little more of that in a moment. Well, let's just recap on the Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, and Jana saga. No apologies for bringing all of this up again, because we need to keep the picture in front of us. But basically, she decides he's unfit to stand trial, even though he was able to go into the House of Lords and vote. But according to Alison Saunders, she'd seen medical evidence that Lord Jana is not fit to stand trial. But it got interesting that she had consulted Neil Moore, who until the end of last year worked at the Essex Street Chambers with Daniel Jana QC. So we've got the head of the Crown Prosecution Service seeking advice from somebody who works with the son of Lord Jana himself. But no conflict of interest there, of course, nothing to worry about. Well, we can say that the murk gets deeper, because this was the Mail's report on a paedophile ring at his son's elite school. Teachers abused the boys, but of course nothing to worry about there either. And then we come to this interesting little story where the son claimed that Lord Jana worked from a chambers based at One Garden Court, where Miss Saunders herself undertook a pupillage. This is part of the trainee stage of a barrister's training. So the son said that she actually trained at a chambers which was used by Lord Jana himself. What did the CPS do? Well, they hit back. A spokeswoman said that the DPP and Grenville Jana have never met. This is ridiculous. And that was reinforced in the Mail article. Britain's most senior prosecutor and Lord Jana have never met, the Crown Prosecution Service has said. Well, we just highlight that because the key question is not really did they meet, it's to start at the beginning. Did Ms Saunders actually work at the same chambers where Lord Jana also worked? Now, we emailed the Crown Prosecution Service this morning just to ask them that very simple question. True to form, we haven't yet had a response. We predict that we will not get a response from the Crown Prosecution Service because they simply do not want to answer the question. So let's have a look then at that set against the wider background of the extraordinary announcements by the National Crime Agency that some 750,000 men were effectively paedophiles. Now, we picked this up and reported it out on the UK Column website, National Crime Agency, 750,000 UK men abusers. And the bit we pointed out was not only that they could not support the statistics which they'd use for a massive front page Mail article, we also pointed out that if there were 750,000 male abusers, there was roughly the same number of female abusers. We asked them for the source of their data. They couldn't find it. But we also challenged the Daily Mail. Well, we were intrigued when they got very hostile with us. This was part of their original story. They bigged up the National Crime Agency figures. 1 in 35 adult males poses a potential risk of being a child abuser. Phil Gormley, the Deputy Director General of the National Crime Agency, said, we're starting to get a real sense of scale. This is not just about Westminster. Everybody's a potential paedophile. And he goes on to say here, the reality is that we're all living not far away from one. So deflecting public attention at Westminster in a very big way. And then we have this article which popped up, which was a lady head teacher who was abusing young boys. She was prosecuted and sent to prison. What happened over the weekend? Well, suddenly the Mail is picking up on this article. A female teacher seducing a boy isn't just a laugh, it's a cruel abuse, says Rachel Johnson. And here's the lady who wrote the article. She got very emotional. She said, sometimes it only takes one thing to make you question everything you thought you knew about child abuse, which was, in my case, that it was a man thing. So she's suddenly picked up on the point that we made, that women are involved too. But she goes on to reinforce the National Crime Agency, where she says it suggested 3% of the male population are potential child abusers. Now, note the phrase suggested, because of course this was a massive article by the Daily Mail, but when we asked for the source statistics, they couldn't provide that information. So we wondered whether the story was itself created. Why would Rachel Johnson want to get involved? Well, we did a little bit of a look into her. We were intrigued to see that she was the daughter of former Conservative MEP Stanley Johnson, and also she's the younger sister of Boris Johnson and the older sister of Jo Johnson, Chief of Policy for the Conservative Party. So perhaps we could ask what she's actually writing this story for. Is it out of concern for the children, or is she perhaps a little bit too close to the Conservative Party itself?
Possibly very keen to further reinforce the notion that it's a widespread problem, not just a Westminster problem.
It's not at Westminster. We don't want to look at paedophiles in government. What you should be worried about is the fact that you've got one living next door to you. So our statement on this is that the Daily Mail has still not come up with the base statistics upon which that National Crime Agency story exclusive was created. And now we've got yet another reporter connected to government spreading it. It's nothing to do with Westminster. This is an endemic problem in the whole population. Well, how about this story? Here we've got a problem at the Duke of York's Royal Military School in Dover, where some time ago a very brave lady came forward, Georgina Halford Hall. She blew the whistle on pretty unpleasant things going on in this very high-profile school, run by the Ministry of Defence until 2010 and boasting the Duke of Kent as a patron. And as it said in the article, a little over a year ago, Miss Halford Hall's nightmare began as she was bundled into a police vehicle and charged with handling stolen documents. In fact, all she'd done is help expose allegations of bullying and systematic abuse at one of the country's most famous military schools. So who pursued her? Well, of course, it was none other than Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service. So when the woman comes forward to do the right thing and expose the abuse, the Crown Prosecution Service goes for her.
Many parallels with Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, I would suggest.
Indeed. Yeah.
And of course, Prince Andrew did visit Oxford and Cherwell Valley College despite having been told what was going on there.
Well, we took the opportunity to phone Prince Andrew's PA to warn him that a few weeks earlier the UK column had run the story about the abuse of youngsters, sexual and physical abuse of youngsters at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Not only did Prince Andrew then go and visit the school, he was taken to the very workshop where some of the worst abuse had taken place. So let's stick with Alison Saunders, very closely aligned obviously to Lord Janner. But she did say, well, her decision could be reversed, which of course it now has. And she told victims that there wasn't enough, they couldn't really put this man in court. So let's remember what she did say. And We had this headline here, that she took legal advice on Grenville Jenner from a former colleague of his son. Yep, all of that took place. And let's bring in Melanie Shaw, because of course Alison Saunders had no trouble charging Melanie Shaw, who herself has PTSD from the abuse which she suffered. And we can now tell you that having been let out of prison again, Melanie Shaw has suffered such severe harassment from Nottingham police that she's had to leave Nottingham. But it would appear that no sooner was Melanie back at home than the abuse and harassment by Nottinghamshire Constabulary started again. So it just seems they're desperate to either get Melanie Shaw to have a complete breakdown, or they want her out of Nottingham. Why is this? Presumably because the scale of the abuse is so severe. Now, a few of you in the chat rooms are mentioning that Bill Maloney this morning was talking about the possibility that the massive refurbishment of Parliament was due to the need to cover up evidence of child abuse which had taken place in Westminster. Well, that could well be true, because we know that witnesses are coming forward talking about being abused in Westminster. Let's just remind ourselves that destroying evidence in this way, easy enough, and in Nottingham City Council was quick on the mark to make sure that Beechwood Children's Home was demolished and houses built on the site, even though the police failed to carry out a full in-depth forensic investigation of that site. So if anything very nasty has occurred, let's get in, let's refurbish, or if we can, let's demolish and make sure evidence, of course, is removed forever. Well, we should trust Britain's police, or some of them. Should we trust NPCC, the new Senior Officers Council? They've been boasting that they're supporting Say Something, a new helpline targeted at children. Let's have a look at that. The helpline is run by the charity Missing People in association with a National Working Group network, which is funded by the Department of Education. So according to tweets from NPCC, we should trust the police, we should trust this organisation. But of course, the Department of Education itself took no action when they were informed of serious physical and sexual abuse of children at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. So wherever you go towards authorities, the same cover-up, the same failure to take action. And if we just come back to dear old David Cameron, we say that when a Prime Minister and his Conservative government will lie to cover up child abuse, then of course they can't be trusted on any single subject, whether it's money, economy, jobs, education, foreign policy, government or the nation, or indeed their comments on ISIS. And if you think the UK column's being a bit hard on this Monday morning, Monday afternoon in fact, then let's just remind ourselves that according to police sources, some 76 MPs are being investigated for child abuse. And these are the people that would have us believe we should trust them to run the country.
There's not really anything else to be said about that, is there?
No, except should we be relying on the church to come and stand up for morality and to protect the children?
Well, certainly not the Vatican anyway. Now, we didn't say too much about this when it was hitting the news. This is the Pope's encyclical into climate change a couple of weeks ago. But I just wanted to highlight somebody that was on the panel, because that was Professor Hans-Joachim Schellnhuber, who's an atheist, of course, and a friend of our own royals, and a rabid climate change fanatic. So here he is. That's what he looks like. He's Hans Joachim, but he calls himself John. So he's the first research director of the UK's Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. That has 8 core partners, including the University of East Anglia. And of course, that was the source of the fraudulent emails, wasn't it? The climate change emails, wasn't it, Brian? He's received a medal from Queen Elizabeth. He's very friendly with Prince Charles. He's a member of the Deutsche Bank Climate Advisory Board. He's on the IPCC. He's helped set up the Potsdam Institute on Climate Change. He's been linked to the World Wildlife Fund, which is Prince Philip's conservation organisation. And at one point, in fact, earlier this week, he gave an interview with the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And he said it was hard. He was talking about the encyclical. He said it was hard work to prepare the insights of science in such a way that now people in the Vatican understand the climate problem much better. And he went on to say, the worry of us scientists was, of course, that the text would accept a false balance, i.e., that it would not present clearly the current state of research concerning climate issues, but only carefully maneuver and merely declare that the one side says this and the other side says that, according to the motto, one does not know anything precise, but the principle of prevention demands that one acts. So he basically is quite openly stating that he was determined that only one side of the argument was going to be presented to the panel. And in fact, that is highlighted by the, sorry, just bring that up again, Nick, sorry. That was highlighted by the fact that Philippe de Larmignat, who is a French scientist who is an anthropomorphic climate change scientist, does not accept the IPCC's position on this. He was actually banned from taking part in this. And Mr. Schellenberger said, even within the Vatican, there were some people who would like to see something that presented both sides, and he was really concerned about the fact that somebody would be invited to speak for the other side. Now, should also point out this guy absolutely promotes the Gaia principle, the idea of Mother Earth, and absolutely rabid, most extreme conservationist you can probably find. Well, what did he write? Or what did he say back at the Copenhagen Climate Conference? He said, in a very cynical way, it's a triumph of science, because he was talking about the conference, it's a triumph for science because at last we have stabilized something, namely the estimates for the carrying capacity of the planet, namely below 1 billion people. And of course, this is really the bottom line with people that think the way he thinks. They want to see the population reduced from the present levels of 6-7 billion down to 1 billion or less. Should also point out this gentleman is a full member of the Club of Rome.
Yeah. So get rid of the useless eaters. Poor people who are starving, we should get rid of them.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, starve them some more, because of course what we don't ever want is any farming activity. We want to make sure that nobody can independently feed their own people. And we want to bring the standard of living right down, basically starve people to death, or at least healthcare reductions, see people dying that way, or perhaps have a nice war with Russia or something that would sort the problem out pretty quickly.
So that's a pretty interesting concept linked to the Roman Catholic Church, that you're going to remove humanity. I don't quite know how that fits with biblical teachings, but presumably the Vatican is going to inform us at some stage. Indeed.
So they've now put this lady, appointed her to chair the debate on climate change mitigation, because this starts a process. Breitbart here quite strong in their condemnation of this lady. So this is Naomi Klein, and she is going to co-chair a conference on climate change alongside Cardinal Peter Turkson. Her latest book is called This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. And she says in it, in order for us to make the kind of progress we need to make in the short amount of time we have left, we must confront the reigning, unquestioning ideology that sees privatization as always good and doesn't question the logic of austerity, doesn't question the logic of pro-corporate free trade deals that have stood in the way of progress on climate, because all she wants is progress on climate. Well, I have to say, you don't have to be socialist in your outlook to question the logic of unbridled privatization, austerity, and pro-corporate free trade deals. But I also question the logic of the climate change people like this, who would see 6 billion people on the planet starve to death, leaving 1 billion behind.
Of their own kind. That's the scary bit.
Well, that's quite possible. Yeah. So, I'm quite sure that she would deny that that's her public position, but I'm also quite sure that it actually is her position on this, as with Schellenberger.
Yeah, nice stuff. Well, let's end on a positive note. We'd like to give credit where it's due. So the press today has been more or less crowing at the breakup of Simon Danzig's marriage. We think this is a private affair. Mr. Danczuk himself says that he's very upset. What would we like to do with the UK column would like to thank this very brave MP for all the work he's been doing to support child abuse survivors. So we do know that there are MPs who are trying to do the right thing, and my goodness, they need as much support as they can get from the public because the pressure is on them. They are working amongst the vile people who would cover up child abuse in Westminster. So if you feel you've got time, perhaps you might like to tweet or email some words of support to Mr. Danczuk and indeed his colleagues who are starting now to really campaign very hard for a full and proper exposure of those despicable members of Parliament who have been involved in child abuse, and perhaps the ones who we might say are even worse, who have known but helped cover it up.
Just before we go, Crane Report 7:30 tonight, and Fracking Nightmare 9 o'clock.
Right. Okay. And I'll just add, don't forget that 8th of July we've got the famous summer budget, and Justin Walker very, very keen for anybody who can attend Westminster on that morning to support him and the call for a reinstatement of the Bradbury pound. Of course, there is a solution to all this nonsense of no money and austerity budgets, and it's simply the reinstatement of a national credit based on the wealth of the nation. It was done with the Bradbury. We can do it again. But as many people as possible to get out there and talk not only to the press and MPs, but other members of the public on the 8th of July would be very welcome. Is that it?
I think so.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.